Welcome to the 9 Elements podcast, brought to you by Restore Hyper Wellness. I'm your host, Eric Hinman. Each week, I sit down with trailblazers in the fitness, nutrition, and wellness communities, exploring how they optimize their daily lives for ultimate performance to do more of what they love. I'm a 5-time Ironman athlete, brand builder, and someone who is obsessed with health and wellness, structuring much of my day around fitness and recovery protocols. On today's episode, I speak with Aaron Alexander, author of The Align Method and creator of the Align Method program and podcast. Aaron believes in a direct correlation between mind, body, and movement, and he is looking to change the way we move through life, from walking to hip hinging to eye movement. Find a proper place to sit, correct your posture, and let's dig in.
What are you grateful for in this day? Most cliche question. What comes to mind? What's the second thing that comes to mind?
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to give you the first thing that comes to mind because I had this conversation in the sauna yesterday. So, you know this. Sarah and I were in Moab for about 6 months before moving back to Denver, Colorado. And, you know, we had a beautiful property there. I know you didn't get to come out, but you probably saw some pictures and videos of it. And we ultimately fell in love with the property, and I love Moab. And, you know, I started integrating some with the community there, but I realized how important social connection is for me and how diverse I want that social connection to be, ranging from athletes, entrepreneurs, creatives. I just like anyone that's super passionate. And ultimately, I got really lonely in Moab, even though it offered everything from the outside perspective you think I would want. And, you know, it's an adventure mecca. We had this amazing property, but I really lacked that social connection. So, I mean, what I'm grateful for and what I've realized over the years is that, you know, social connection is what ultimately makes me really, really happy. And I know you know Andrew Huberman, and maybe you listened to his most recent podcast, but he was talking about, you know, money not being correlated to happiness, but money being correlated to being able to at least get you into different social tribes. And I do think that is a key to happiness because we've been fortunate to build this amazing, you know, health and wellness compound here in Denver where we attract amazing humans, and I get to have those social interactions that I want to have with, you know, really interesting people. So I'm grateful for human connection, all of my friends, including you, and just those wonderful conversations I get to have with those people.
Yeah, that's since I imagine this conversation will likely veer into directions of health and fitness and wellness and things of the sort. I think it's very interesting, some of the kind of outside of the obvious box factors in wellness and in fitness. I'm reading the book Untethered Soul right now from Michael Singer. I just got done with a 108-hour darkness retreat. I was sitting cooped up in a dark room for a while.
I want to hear all about this.
Yeah, and so in that time frame, there was a lot of, obviously, you know, introspection and kind of exploration of my subconscious mind and, you know, my experience, my relationship with myself. And in the Michael Singer book, have you read Untethered Soul?
I have. Incredible book. I read it really about 3 years ago. I can't agree more. It's so important. Yeah. And I read it when I was going through a breakup, and she actually had recommended it to me as something I should read. Yeah. So, you know, I was fortunate that she did recommend it to me because it was really empowering.
Yeah. And so I think one of those invisible factors to fitness and wellness, and the less advertised factors, you know, is because there's not really an easy accessible affiliate code for spirit, you know, or chi or shakti, or the terms they're kind of breaking down in the book there, depending upon which perspective you're looking at it from. But the analogy that they had in there was, you know, if you break up with a girlfriend or a girlfriend breaks up with you and you're depressed and disheveled and you're not washing your clothes and there's mustard stains all over you and you're just I can't bear it. You know, I can't go through with the day. And then suddenly she calls you back in 3 weeks and she's like, Eric, I made a mistake. You're the love of my life. You know, I want to be with you. You know, come get me, baby. Suddenly, your energy, you could be taking all the colostrum pills and all the creatine and all the exercise and bicep curls and all the things. Suddenly, that girl in this analogy hits you up and suddenly your energy, the composition, like the structural experience of your energy completely goes from zero to being fired out of a gun in a matter of an instant. And so it's like, what the hell is that? What is that quote unquote energy part that I think most people in Western culture have a lot of, at least like suspicion around, rightfully so, because there's a lot of, I think, like soft talk around that. That doesn't necessarily have any ground in anything that people can really like hold on to and comprehend. But that aspect of what kind of actually gets us into a place of wanting to exercise in the first place. And a research study that I'm sure you're familiar with. It's the longest longitudinal study ever done. I think it started in 1936, if I remember correctly. It was done with Harvard or at Harvard University. And they tracked people from being babies through the entirety of their lives, and they also tracked their children. And what they found was that the longest lever in supporting their health and their longevity from just all-cause mortality, reducing the likelihood of death, and just overall health markers, was feeling like they had access to community. Not just community, but actually meaningful community. Like they actually have people in their lives that they love, they care about, and reciprocally they feel the same about them, and they have a purpose. And that purpose typically comes back to something I'm doing. I'm cultivating some skill in cultivating myself to offer back to the tribe, and it all comes back to community. And it's not the easiest conversation sometimes because it's not measurable. It's not so it is manageable, but it's not like 5 grams, of a meaningful relationship 2 times a day. It's a little bit more nebulous. And so we end up focusing on some of the things that we can hold in our hands. But I don't think that those things are actually the longest levers in governing our health.
Agree. It'd be interesting if you could take, dopamine levels before a highly engaging conversation with someone where you feel like you got value and gave value, and then dopamine levels afterwards. Because, that's what's happening when that girl reaches back out to you, is you get this spike in dopamine, and it's the same with the conversations that I have with people. And I don't know your background, in your 20s. I'm assuming that you probably had a party phase just like I did. And those conversations and those relationships were so superficial compared to the relationships I have with people now, where I form bonds through sauna and cold exposure sessions. I form bonds through fitness. And in the sauna, I have some of the best conversations of my life. And it's such a high after that session, and it goes beyond just the heat. It's those conversations that I'm having with people in that captive environment, how present I am with them, the mental clarity I have to be able to just unlock all of these different chapters in my mind to spew value. And the same holds true for the other people in there. I just feel like the mental clarity they have and the value they're able to add back just through conversation produces this incredible dopamine hit afterwards.
Yeah. Then you have to watch out for the whole dopamine thing, because then you can also go through withdrawals of the thing as well.
Yeah.
And that's something that this is a very relevant conversation in relation to these digital hits of friendship or digital hits of sensuality or sex, or like all these different factors that we crave. And we have these various different neural circuits and neurochemicals that drive us to engage in certain behaviors. And, one of those might be like, say, sexuality, because porn's a very obvious one, but also just like friendship, notifications. Someone's my buddy out there in the digital space. So when you go through the actual process of taking a gal or fella out on a date, and you have conversation and meaningful connection, you build a bond and a bridge, and it's like you're building a vessel to navigate with. And then maybe you engage in some type of sexual thing, or maybe you guys kiss at the end of the night, and you have that dopamine spike because it's you're yearning for this thing. And then, but you've built yourself a boat, you've built yourself a vessel to continue navigating with, compared to it being something where it's just like, you haven't done any of the work. You haven't really built any social skills. You haven't built any social network. You haven't exercised or engaged in really anything. And you just jump straight to the reward. That's where it starts to begin the beginning of a cycle of an addiction. And you don't actually you haven't cultivated any of the resources that lead to the reward. And it's a similar thing. Maybe you could say that, I mean, I think it's like, a lot of these analogies parallel many aspects of life. You could say that maybe even the cultivation of food. We live in an immediate gratification culture where I'm hungry, I just I reach my hand in the fridge, I'll pull it out, and I'm eating food. Compared to something that would be a health-inducing practice would be the process of cultivating food. The process of actually going out and maybe hunting or maybe gathering. Not that anyone actually needs to do that in any world to be healthy or happy. But if you're not doing those things, it would be wise just to kind of fill in some of those spaces with some types of like practices of sorts, which is like, I think that's a big part of what you share, which is why it's, so appealing and meaningful.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think it was, again, Andrew Huberman who said if there's no effort to get the serotonin boost, it's probably not a good serotonin boost. It's probably not going to be sustainable. So drugs, for example, you're going to get a tremendous hit of serotonin, but you're going to have a tremendous low from that. It's not something that is sustainable. And there's a lot of people who were once into the party scene, into drugs, that have become addicted to exercise, which I think addicted might be the wrong word because that's a negative connotation. But I do think that you can take some of exercise too far to get that dopamine hit. For example, in my Ironman days, I definitely was using endurance training to feel good day in and day out. And I had to keep going further and faster to get that same rush, that same high. And I was pounding my body into the ground to do it. I was waking up in the mornings and my body ached. I didn't have any of the, sauna protocols back then, the cold exposure protocols. I don't think I really understood the boost in serotonin that you could get just from human connection. And I've been able to now build my day around a variety of practices that kind of keep my stoke high day in and day out without this roller coaster ride of dopamine, because you do an Ironman, your dopamine levels are way up here, then they're going to go way below baseline afterwards. That's why a lot of people have this, depression for several weeks after doing an Ironman. So I'm really cognizant to not to take things too far to an extreme, because I want to feel the same day in and day out. And it's also a reason why I don't really enjoy competing anymore, is because I know the high from that is going to be so extreme that there's going to be some down days afterwards.
Yeah. And so that's would, from my perspective, and it's definitely not just my perspective, but many folks' perspective, the most reasonable way to integrate fitness that actually has longevity to it, something you're going to keep on engaging with, for the rest of your life, would be integrating really simple factors or practices just into your daily ritual or your daily life. And so there's been quite a bit of research from this, particularly in NASA, because astronauts go to space. They don't have any gravity, so they don't actually have that pressure kind of pushing down and activating the various different systems in their body. So they really have to figure out what's the best approach to incorporate fitness into these astronauts' daily lives. And what they found with that was, and I actually had one of the main researchers on my podcast. I don't remember what her name is right now. It might come to me throughout this conversation. But what she/they found was that having small bouts of fitness throughout the day was significantly more supportive for reducing the deleterious effects of zero gravity on astronauts than doing a big CrossFit, banger workout for 2 hours and then just kind of floating into oblivion for the rest of the day. And that looks a lot like many people's modern models of the way that they engage with their physicality, their exercise. The idea of I do exercise in and of itself is kind of a strange aberration to the human experience. It's a very rare occurrence in looking at it from evolutionary terms for a human to get up, cool, I'm going to do exercise. It's more you fill in these spaces throughout the day with the way that you gather water, the way that you gather food, the way that you sort out your shelter, the way that you all of the things, take care of your children, temperature regulation. It gets a little hot, it gets a little cold. It's just it's wrapped up into the package of a person's life. So now we live in a world which is very convenient. We've kind of like outsmarted nature in some ways. It's very convenient that we've done that. We're brilliant creatures, but now we have to actively start to fill back in those spaces if we want to, have the optimal outcomes for ourselves at a cellular level. So integrating little practices, which would probably be interesting to maybe touch on some of those. But I think those are two different models of fitness in a way. One is fitness is who I am. That's one side. And then the other is fitness is this thing that I do. And I think that in and of itself, I think is, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I do a lot of things outside of just the gym exercise, trail running, rucking, mountain biking, road cycling, pavement running, and all of that, definitely feels more evolutionary in nature. And I've seen people that have gone to various tribes in, say, Africa, and the tribe in Africa sees that person exercising, and they're like, "What are you doing?" Because they don't exercise in the traditional sense of the world.
You're
like, we go hunting.
Calories. What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly,
bro.
Exactly. So you're right. I mean, it's a kind of a unique thing that we have to do, but I look at it from an evolutionary standpoint of, because I'm not forced to hunt anymore. I'm not forced to, walk somewhere to find shelter. I'm not forced to, seek some heat when it's cold out or seek cold when it's hot out. That these things I have to reapply into my life, and it makes sense why you would thrive by reintroducing them, because it's just evolutionary in nature to have to. I mean, movement is medicine is a moniker I use all the time, and it truly is medicine for my mind, my spirit. All of these things that I do, and I'm sure you do, you're doing them more for mental and emotional well-being than you are to get this aesthetic from it. And
no, I like the aesthetic too.
I mean, I don't not like the aesthetic, but I don't go to the gym thinking about how can I make my body more of a, sculpture. I go to the gym for performance. Everything I do is for performance. And, my body takes the shape of whatever I'm training for at the moment. If I'm running more, then I lean out and I lose weight. If I'm lifting more, I gain mass. But it's really geared around, what am I psyched about? Is it mountain biking season because there's no snow on the trails? Or is it the winter time and I'm going to be in the gym a bit more because I can't be out there biking through the forest? So
that gets into that kind of like the Untethered Soul, Michael Singer stuff of getting into the like, how does a person become stoked about what they're doing? So I think it's a worthy question to ask of like, why am I going to the gym? Why am I engaging in this diet? Why am I doing anything? And if a person is really honest with themselves, oftentimes the reason that they're doing some type of workout thing or diet or whatever it may be is perhaps coming from a place of like, well, I won't love myself if I don't do that. So it's almost like this conditional relationship we have with ourselves. Or maybe like, I want to do this because I want to be sexy for this guy or girl. So it's like, it's to be able to come back and actually have a relationship with fitness and with food, even like letting go of the idea of diet, just food, like the joy of eating compared to, I do time restricted eating and I'm in my feeding window. It's like your feeding window. Like what about just like actually like celebrating this experience of like, wow, like we get to eat. Wow, we get to move. But to do that, I think it takes a little bit of it may take some exploration into what is my why. It's like Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. If you have a strong why, you can endure anyhow. And so many people with our fitness, in my experience, I think oftentimes we have very superficial relationships with why we do the things that we do. If you go to a place where, the reason that I stay fit is because it's the way that I feed my family. It's the way that I keep myself warm. It's the way that, I live this robust life. It's just a natural byproduct of, the things that I'm seeking. It translates to fitness. Compared to having this strange, like aberration of a workout, doing these obscure exercises that don't really relate to anything we do in our lives, and just having this is just this kind of like homework assignment that we have for ourselves. Whereas if you have a purpose, you're training for a sport, you're training for just something that you really care about, it just changes things. It makes you more engaged, which is, if you're going to do something, hopefully you feel like there's a sense of purpose on why you're doing it.
I can't agree more. I think you need a sense of purpose, and you also need to enjoy the journey. And I mean, in my Ironman years, early on in those years, I definitely was doing it because I just had the Kona World Championships on my mind with every training session. And once I got there, 3 days afterwards, I was seeking something else. I realized that it really wasn't it didn't make me as happy as I thought it was going to make me. It was really the day-to-day progress that kept the stoke high. And, after that, I really lost my purpose with the sport because I realized I wasn't doing it for myself anymore. I was doing it because I was labeled as an Ironman athlete, and I wasn't enjoying the process anymore. So that's why I switched to more strength training, more anaerobic conditioning, mountain biking, things that I really, really enjoy and look forward to on a daily basis. It's never a checklist item. And I love your message with fitness, though, because it's so different than most, because I still am kind of pigeonholed and, I have my CrossFit training in the morning. I have my 90-minute mountain bike session, although, I don't have any of this programmed per se anymore of I have to hit this certain time domain at this certain effort. But, I generally am biking or running, hiking for 60 to 90 minutes in the afternoon, and I feel good afterwards. But I think your message is more of, why don't you just think of the entire day as exercise? It doesn't have to be just when you go to the gym. Yeah. It can be mobility when you're sitting for dinner. You really include exercise throughout your day. And I don't think you think of it as exercise. You just think of it as thriving by living kind of ancestrally. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah. I mean, ancestrally, a concept like ancestrally only exists when someone or a culture is kind of divorced from common ways of living from the past. There's very few, probably, I don't know, tribe people in Africa or the Amazon or something that's thinking we live ancestrally. It's we just live. And we dance and we drum and we watch the sunset and we howl at it when it goes down, and we have sex, and we have this. It's like this. Our bare feet are on the ground, and we're walking between maybe 5 to 8 miles a day or so, and we're getting up, we're squatting, we're sitting all the way down on the ground, we're kneeling. And there was another study that was done from Southern California, University of Southern California, where they actually went out, and this is just pretty recent, in the last few years, they went out and spent time with Hadza people in northern Tanzania. And what they found, they hooked them up with various different devices that would measure the range of motion that their hips and knees and such were going throughout the day. And what they found was that the people that they were following were actually spending, on average, a very similar amount of time in quote-unquote resting positions as industrialized cultures. And so the very exact median average they got with that was 9.82 hours each day in resting positions. Wow. And so the idea of oh my God, because we have kind of a new barnacle, I would say, in our perception of what we should and shouldn't be doing with our bodies, where it's oh man, I always need to be moving. I can't stop moving or I'm going to get, obese or anxious or develop some type of disease. It's well, no, your ancestors would be conserving energy a lot. It's just the art and science and practice of resting is something to look at. It's in fact the highest volume of what you'll do in your whole entire life. You're going to sleep, and then you're going to be in resting positions throughout the day, and occasionally engage in activity. And so it's whoa, okay, so that's huge. That's the base of the iceberg is resting positions in a person's life. And then we have the little peak that we post about on social media, we put on the cover of Muscle and Fitness, and then everything else is resting positions. But it's not that interesting to talk about unless you're actually, like hold on, and so within that, the way that people in these particular tribes, which would be pretty consistent across, any type of ancestral group, or just hang out with a child, before they learn how to move from adulthood, and grade school, which is very strange if you really, step back and you take a look at it. They'd be in kneeling positions for a good chunk of the time. They'd be in squatting positions for a good chunk of the time. They'd be, they maybe sit down in like a straddle position. They'd be in like a seiza position. And these are all in the book, the Align Method the book that I did called the Align Method. I have a whole chapter around floor sitting, and how this is like it's like a key to the fountain of youth in a way, I would say, because when you're getting up and down off of the ground, and it feels almost asinine talking about it, it's kind of a pun. Because it's like, oh my God, like, bro, like, let's do a muscle up. Like, let's do something awesome. Let's like get some, some flames. Like I want six pack, but just the practice of getting up and down off of the ground, which doesn't need to be a practice, just like the lifestyle choice. While you're doing that, you're taking your toe hinge through full range of motion. You're taking your ankles through full range of motion, your knees, your hips, your pelvic floor muscles. The adult diaper industry is exceeding that of the adult baby industry. It's supposed to happen, I think, in the next couple of years. So I'm not exactly not tracking those numbers, too closely, but like it's happening. Where incontinence is such a thing that it's like, wow, crazy. Like we're adults are peeing their pants at such a rate that it's exceeding that of babies. Like, wow. That's
unreal.
That's pretty unreal. You're like, is that just normal? Is that just what it is to be a human? Like, probably not. And so through by a culture divorcing themselves of going through this, what you could consider an ancestral practice, I guess you could say, but it's really just like it's a ancestral foundation to inhabiting a body effectively. Of just getting up and down off the ground. It's a natural tuning mechanism, you could say, for the joints, and also it's supported with circulating lymphatic fluid. The way that you circulate lymphatic fluid is through muscular contraction. So if you are just sitting stagnantly, especially if your legs are down below, like way down below the height of your heart, and if you sit on an airplane, you get like cankles. You have all this like fluid buildup in there. It doesn't look nice. It doesn't feel nice. The most tiring thing a person can possibly do, and I'm sure you can attest to this, is stand in a museum. If you were just standing in a museum, just looking at stuff, and you're not turning your gears and walking and circulating your fluids, it bogs the system down. So that would just be a very simple, apparent people could start to engage with, of just like, oh, I'm just going to get up and down off of the ground. Maybe if I'm drinking tea in the morning or coffee or whatever, maybe I get a low, get a coffee table, get a floor cushion. As we're doing this conversation, I'm sitting on the ground right now. It doesn't look like it, but that's the way it is. My butt's up on a cushion, so I'm in cross-legged position. I'll probably do a straddle in a second. I'll do a 90-90 position in a second. So I'm perfusing all of the, my hip joints, my knees and ankles, etc., with new healthy fluid. And I'm cycling out that old stagnant fluid just as a product of having this conversation with you, compared to my legs sitting in the same static position for the whole entire time. And it's not even really like a mechanically advantageous position from a perspective of circulation, and also like just from like developing leverage. Most people, if they're sitting down on a chair, they're probably kind of like folding the pelvis underneath, and they're kind of like, it's not a really strong deadlift or squat position that they're cultivating. And a fancy term, then I'll shut up, is Mechano-Transduction, which essentially means that your joints and like all of your biological matter, it forms based off of mechanical stimuli or like movement stimuli. So you're continually forming the structure of your connective tissue and your joints and your blood vessels. And so if you are perpetually kind of putting yourself in this just kind of like hunched over forward head, kind of just like semi-collapsed type position, like you're forming yourself into that by making a decision to say, cool, I'm going to have a little bit more like active rest positions. I mean, it truly is the difference between being, 80 or 90 or maybe younger than that, and having to have some type of button with you in case you accidentally get all the way down to the ground and you can't get yourself back up off of the ground. That's the number one leading reason for elderly needing assisted living is fall risk. I've fallen and I can't get up. That is not a human thing. That has nothing to do with just being oopsie, like just a human. I get to this age and you don't get up and down off the ground anymore. Not if you're in Japan. Not if you're in probably most places throughout Africa. Not if you're any place that didn't make a either unconscious or conscious choice to divorce themselves from that really fundamental act of just getting up and down off of the ground with regularity. That was a very long-winded explanation of something that's like ridiculously simple. The last thing with that is cultures that do get up and down off the ground with regularity, or they spend time on the ground. They have minimal to no incidence of osteoarthritis in the hips, very low incidence of osteoarthritis in the knees, pelvic floor dysfunction, things of the sort, like not so much a thing. Fall risk, not a thing. That's just, fall risk is something that it's because culturally we've chosen to just stop. It's not something that just naturally at some point you come, the clock strikes 70 years old and your body's just like, we don't do that anymore. Every day you don't do it with that regularity, it gets a little bit wider and a little bit wider, a little bit wider until you can't jump it anymore. And then you're like, oh man, well now you're old. Like that's like, okay, it's official. So making the conscious choice while you can do it, it's like a no-brainer. Like it feels almost silly talking about it, but the implications are massive.
It's really not, though. I mean, because people spend so much time, sitting in an office, and they are rewiring their circuitry to not be able to perform when they're older with all of those sets and reps of sitting in a chair in an improper position is my deduction of that. And then the question I have, so I'm at a standing desk right now. I prefer standing a lot. What are your thoughts on a standing desk, or even, now they have the treadmill desks and the cycling desks. Is your opinion of those, is it just as bad as sitting in the same position because you're essentially staying in the same position by standing?
Standing desks are great, but it's still a sedentary position, and your legs depends. Like me, I have issues with circulation. I'm like a canary in the coal mine for all this stuff. So I have varicose veins. I have I posted about the surgery on my Instagram, my highlight reels. It's like pretty ridiculous, a phlebotomy where they're going through and yanking these veins out of my legs. And so I've had that since I was like a kid, and it's like a hereditary thing. What the root source of it is, I don't know exactly. Maybe it's just generally dysfunctional valves in my family. But so for me, I can feel pressure building up in my lower compartments, i.e. my legs. Other people that are in that scenario can actively feel that, and it feels very uncomfortable. It can even be painful. For me, I just can feel it. I'm like, oh, like this doesn't seem good, And a lot of people die from blood clots each year. It's a very common thing you're just sitting around and suddenly, a clot starts to develop as a product of stasis. A circulating system doesn't just clot up unless there's some other situations happening there. So standing in place is a sedentary position that is way more, metabolically effective. You're burning more calories. You might be balancing more, so proprioceptively, there's more action going on there. But it wouldn't, if you were to have a comparison game of standing compared to resting positions on the ground, resting positions on the ground, just the passive act of engaging those positions, you're going to naturally go through different ranges of motion. It's because you'll get uncomfortable. So you go through, I'm in a 90-90 position right now. I didn't think about it. I wasn't like, okay, it's been 6.5 minutes, go from cross-legged to 90. My body's just like, okay, bro, it's time to move. And so that's the big thing is that the body is very intelligent, and if you just hang out with a small child is probably not going to just stand in place and look at a screen for a while, but they might sit on the ground And they have this really amazing structure where they can kind of naturally find this alignment of their spine, and it's like they're stacking their skeletal structure. It's so beautiful. It's called tensegrity. That harmonious balance of all the connective tissue, kind of just the body just almost feels like it's like floating on itself. If you start to open up some of those impingements and allow the joints to go through their full ranges of motion. And one of the big things would just be allowing your body to go through a full range of motion with regularity. So being on the ground, your legs are going to be closer to your heart, so it's going to be better for circulation. So that would be a good thing if you're eating. You want to have as much blood available for your viscera in order to support the digestion and redistribution of those nutrients. So you want to have that blood in your belly. So if your legs are far away from your abdomen, then it's not going to be as efficient to be able to cycle that blood back to the viscera. Whereas if you're sitting on the ground, like you would do maybe if you go to Japan or many Asian countries or many African places or any of that, just naturally the way that you exist there is more conductive for healthy digestion and healthy circulation and healthy joint mobility and joint health. So I would say stacked back to back, if we were to run a competition between spending time on the ground and standing, I think it would be tough to argue that sitting on the ground doesn't have more advantages than standing. And standing's good. You're going to be burning more calories. You're going to be balancing more. But ground is it's easier on the body. You're circulating more effectively. You're mobilizing. And sitting on the ground would take the cake.
Yeah. I mean, I've had dinner with you several times, and you're always sitting on the ground with your legs crossed, sometimes with, a little pillow under you. And it's so uncomfortable for me because I don't do it often, but I need to.
You just need to raise your hips up. So
putting a cushion under.
Yeah. So this conversation can seem a bit far-fetched and almost like alienating to some people, because it's like, okay, cool for like the 5% of yoga bros listening to this. They're like, oh yeah, of course, no big deal. But then for everybody else, it's like, yeah, but that's super uncomfortable and I need a chair. You don't need a chair. You need your hips to be up above the height of your knees. If your hips are up above the height of your knees, so if you put a ball on your femur or femurs, then it would roll down towards your knee. What that will do is it will stabilize your lower back and your sacrum. So the bottom vertebra, L5 and S1, are more in a wedge shape, with the wide edge of the wedge facing towards your navel, like forward. And so when you get your hips just slightly up above the height of your knees, then that will naturally be able to almost like nest those joints so they can rest into themselves and not be placing excessive pressure on the discs and kind of just in this like collapsing position.
Sure.
So if your hips are up above the height, for some people that might be like, cool, my hip, for that to happen, my hips need to be like, essentially need to be like on a chair, like a very low chair. It's like, okay, cool. Like let's start there, and start to maybe splay your legs and, cross them up a little bit, start to work on a little bit of lengthening of the adductor muscles, and start to, maybe you can even do like some P&F stretches, where you're kind of pressing against the inside of your hands, hold that for 5 seconds. And then on an exhalation, lengthen out a little bit more, and then slowly start to drop that down. And it's just, it's good for everything, and it's also very convenient because you're a more adaptable person when you go somewhere that's not a chair culture.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you talked a bit about blood clots, circulation. What are your thoughts on regular sauna use from a circulatory standpoint?
It's awesome. Yeah. The reason that, so there's the research with sauna, obviously a lot of it comes from Finland, because they're like the majority I've never been to Finland, but the majority of people just have saunas in their homes, from what I'm told, which sounds
one for every household.
That's impressive. Yeah. Have you ever been out there?
I haven't, but I'm planning a trip for next year.
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
Cool. Yeah,
I'll loop you in if you want to come. Yeah,
I would love that. That'd be really cool. But so I find that to be, that's, to me, just living in a culture like that, where it's just a standard practice to have a sauna in your house, that's a really beautiful testament to the culture as a whole, like the health of the culture as a whole and their value systems. But the reason that saunas pretty much across the board are so darn supportive for reducing things like cognitive dysfunction, cardiovascular disease of any sort. I just did a podcast recently on saunas and infrared compared to traditional, all that stuff. And so I had the numbers handy recently, but they're drifting a little bit right now. But it's like surprising how much sitting in a sauna each day, or maybe 5 days a week or so, reduces the likelihood of developing some type of cardiovascular disease or some type of dementia or cognitive decline or things of the sort. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is, among lots of things, I think there's some like invisible factors in there as well, like just mindfulness, stillness, introspection, probably community, all of that I think is really huge. But it's mimicking cardiovascular exercise. When you're in a sauna, you'll notice your heart starts beating and your body's like, it's working. You're just sitting there getting hot, but your body's going bum, 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 bum. That's what happens when you go for a run. Like that's what happens when you compete in a jiu-jitsu competition. Like it's like metabolically, cardiovascularly, those are the things that happen. Mm-hmm. And so not everybody wants to be like you, where you're like going to go on a mountain bike ride and you're going to go for a run and you're just like, you really keep on challenging your cardiovascular system, which is so cool. Mm-hmm. Very few people are like that. Mm-hmm. Most people can just sit in a hot room once a day for, 18 to 22 minutes. Mm-hmm. And while you're in there, you're mimicking, a pretty, could be intense cardiovascular workout. So you're just circulating everything. So it's perfusing blood into all those nooks and crannies throughout the brain and throughout the heart and the muscles and the connective tissue, and you're also probably engaging in community. You're also maybe doing some kind of like meditation thing. You might be starting to pay attention to your breath while you're in there. Mm-hmm. So something you could do with that would be emphasizing maybe long exhalations. So that's going to start to, most diseases are somehow tied to the system being under stress. Mm-hmm. Some kind of stress is in there somewhere. So if we have these natural purgative practices throughout our daily life where it's just integrated, I just purge stress, baby. Like that's just the way I do it. And so one of those things would be paying attention to the way that a person breathes. If someone comes in, so we're still talking about sauna, we could stack variables. So we're in the heat shock proteins, cardiovascular exercise, like we're taking our body through that. Now we can also start to engage in supporting our nervous system through breathing, emphasize long exhalations. While you're doing that, emphasize nasal breathing. So when you're breathing through your nose, now going back to cardiovascular health, you're going to be producing significantly more nitric oxide. Mm-hmm. So as you're breathing, you have the air is going through the nasal concha, the turbinates, and it's going through this windy system that as it's passing through that system, it's producing nitric oxide to be circulated through the rest of your body. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, you're on Amazon buying an NO supplement, breathing through your mouth in some frantic fashion. Like so we have access to most of the things that we're going to buy endogenously for the most part, and one of those would be, NO is a big one. But a part of that is it's just generally more calming and soothing for the nervous system. Something else you could add in that to increase nitric oxide, which is probably something that you and people listening to this would care about, is humming significantly increases nitric oxide as well, because now you're introducing this oscillation through there, which has an effect on producing more NO. It also has an effect on tonifying the nervous system as a whole, particularly like the more famous one would be the vagus nerve. Mm-hmm. So now you're starting to down regulate and create like a bridge or a connection from your the mind to the body, the vagus nerve. So it means like the wandering nerve, vagrant. So it's innervating a lot of different visceral tissue, a lot of different organs, and 80% of the nerve pathways in the vagus nerve are afferent, meaning they're coming from the viscera to the brain. And then 20% are efferent, meaning they're coming down from the brain to the nerve. So the brain is in charge telling the organs what to do. Most of the pathways in the vagus nerve are actually from the body informing the brain, which is pretty interesting. So you start to, you're humming, you can relax your vision, taking the panoramic view. compared to, myopically focusing in on your cell phone. Like, don't bring your cell phone into the sauna while you're there. Use it as an opportunity to just, relax the eyes, relax the breathing, maybe engage in some type of breathing practice, maybe incorporate some type of tonality into there, hum a little bit, just something like make a little sound. Like if you're really decompressing, you might be a little bit audible, which sounds crazy. It sounds weird, but it's your body's natural tuning mechanism. So spending time on the ground, natural tuning mechanism. You didn't need to do anything, right? Sitting in a more relaxed, less hypervigilant way, natural tuning mechanism. If you hang out with, we can learn so much from babies. You hang out with a baby, they'll just do stuff. They'll feel anxiety or some type of feeling, like this energy, quote unquote energy, build up inside of themselves. And then they cry or they move their arms around, or maybe they'll cover their eyes or they'll cover their ears, or they just let it out. Whereas an adult, all that stuff is very weird, and I don't want to be a crazy person. I don't want to be that guy. But having space to allow these natural healing mechanisms, these natural tuning mechanisms, like these endogenous tuning mechanisms that every human being, every biological creature is equipped with, getting out of the way of yourself to allow those things just to start to kind of come through. You reduce stress, you reduce disease. You reduce stress, you open yourself up to deeper connections with people. You're not engaging your life from kind of like a fight, flight, panic, scarcity mindset. You're engaging with things where like, oh man, you're like, you know what? Like, I got what I need. I'm going to be all right. That's magnetic to be around. Oh, okay. Now you're starting to turn the relationship gear. People like to be around you. You're like, oh, okay, well now I'm starting to develop community. And it started off from me just allowing my nervous system to regulate itself. And then from there, okay, cool, community. Oh, maybe that opens up to some business thing. Now people want to start to team up with me. Now I have a business. Oh, wow. Now I'm starting to make some more money. Oh, cool. All right. Now I feel more safe. Oh, I feel more like almost like more masculine in a way. I'm like, okay, like I'm starting to build an empire here. This is like, wow. I'm like, I can like rest into that gratification of like, I'm bringing value to the tribe. But if a person starts from a place of being closed and starts from a place of doing and grinding, and the nervous system's it's just being worn down, there's just like an easier path. But a part of that path, I know that we're kind of wandering a bit, which is maybe a pun again with the vagus nerve. But a part of that path is being willing to get out of the way of yourself, which is, again, that's not very standard Western mindset. It's very like, okay, let's do this. What are we going to do? But if you get a little more quiet with yourself in a thing like a sauna, oftentimes if you're in there long enough, your body will just start to do things. And it's like, okay, like what's my body suggesting here? What feels true to do right now? And a lot of times it'll be a lot of things you'll read about in research papers and such.
For thousands of years, people have been exposing themselves to cold therapy as a means of recovery. The cold shock response helps give the body an energy boost, improves cognitive function, aids in circulation, and shapes our overall natural defense systems. At Restore Hyper Wellness, cryotherapy treatments are the best way to chill out. Choose from whole body cryotherapy, which immerses you in a world of sub-zero temperatures for a few short minutes, or local cryotherapy, a great way to enjoy the same benefits of whole body cryo in a specified location like your knee or another body part. Want to try it out? 9 Elements listeners can receive 20% off your first Restore service using the code ELEMENTS20 when making your first appointment. That code again is ELEMENTS20 to save 20% when booking your first service with Restore. Yeah, I love how you brought it full circle all the way to, business opportunities and thriving, because I do truly believe that if you can invest in yourself and your cup is full, you're going to attract so many opportunities back to you. And that's really how I've lived my life the last 10 years since the Ironman days, is just really focusing on investing in myself, being the best version of myself, being innate, and just attracting opportunities instead of chasing, and limiting stress through stressful practices, which is unique that the cold, the sauna, the workouts, like all of these things are obviously stressors, but they train you to deal with stress. So when someone cuts you off on the road, you don't stick your middle finger up at them. It doesn't ruin your day. You know, you have trained your nervous system to handle stress. And the community aspect of it. So going back to Finland, the reason they have a sauna for each household wasn't because of health reasons. They did it because that's where they would have deep conversations, political conversations, family conversations. So sauna for them is based around community, and they're the happiest country in the world. Like you said, there's a ton of compounding benefits with sauna, but that's their reasoning for it is community. That's where they have deep conversations with people. And I think that is why they're consistently ranked as one of the happiest countries in the world, because they have those deep connections. And I think there's also some of that stress resilience component to it as well, of by exposing yourself to these stressors, you know, you're not stressed out as often, you're happier, you live longer.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I mean, it's just it's really, it's like so much is like just value systems. There's a lot of the things that we talk about the most, at least what I hear talked about the most, are like, you know, the hard factors of, cool, we're going to do this type of HIIT training, and we're going to have our deload days, and we're going to do like, it's very like the regiment schedule. Okay, this is the path forward, which is true. Having structures is really valuable. But then the other aspect of that is like just the listening part.
Yeah, innate.
You know, and that's, if you look at yourself, you know, and you go kind of through like the Russian doll set of how things start to look like each other on the different layers, you know, you're back to the vagus nerve thing. Most of the nerve pathways there are listening pathways. So they're saying, okay, like, what's going on in here? I'm going to shh. All right, okay. Okay, the stomach's saying that. Oh, okay, the diaphragm. Oh, the heart. Okay, I think this is what the heart needs. You know, and that's when when a person's healthy, you know, and they're in like a state, you know, ready for fitness or going, they have high variability with their heart rate. You know, so their HRV, you'd think, because humans are, you know, since the discovery of the internet, humans are starting to converge with becoming a robot, right? So you'd think just like a consistent system, right? Or just, you know, it's just like an engine. It's just a piston, bam, 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 bam. Nope, not a human. Humans run on deep listening, and we run on variability and say, oh, no, like this is exactly what we need right now. Okay, okay, let's wait an eighth of a second. Okay, here we go, right there. And to be able to have that level of attunement with what the heck is going on, it takes, you know, a little bit less doing, a little bit less like, all right, what's going on here? You know, and if you go to a culture where it's like, no, like we have a foundation to any home is we have this place where we go and we listen to each other. And it's like, whoa, weird. You know? Whereas, you know, in maybe some place that doesn't have that aspect, maybe there's a lot less, you know, communication between people, between relationships, and then that creates turmoil, that creates friction, communication with self. You know, a meditation practice is a beautiful way to go in and start to observe, like, what is the architecture of my mind? What is it like in here? Because I'm so engaged in doing all day long, I don't have time to observe what are the thoughts that I tell myself throughout the day. You know, so if you start to say like, all right, hold on, it's freaking Thanksgiving. Yeah, I'm not gonna, you know, we're just gonna be a listening day. I want to hear from my partner. Like, how do you feel about this relationship? You know, what can I do better? Like, what do you love about me? What do you maybe let's lean into some of it's maybe not just about, you know, what I can do better. Like, what are the things that are working? Let's highlight that. You know, and start to open up those realms of communication. Okay, well, what about your fitness? Like, what am I doing that's working? Well, it feels really good when I go for a walk. I love that. It's not like the most impressive thing, you know, but I could build up with stress, and then I go out and I take a little 20-minute walk, and I let go of my phone for a second, you know, and I look up into the trees, and I come back and like, wow, that feels really good. I really love my little breathwork practice, or like whatever your thing is. Just coming back and saying like, okay, like what makes me feel good? Not what do I think I need to do based off of like some preconceived idea of what is sexy or what is cool or what is whatever. Like what actually feels good for me. And yeah, I think it just makes like life doesn't need to be as effortful, I think, as what many of us make it. And a lot of the people that, if you see someone that's a brilliant athlete, or a snowboarder, they're in like the X Games or something, while they're hitting the 1080 whatever trick thing, while they're in it, it's not so much like a trying or a doing. It's this buildup of practice and then this opening of almost just allowing themselves to go through the motion or like be with the motion.
Yep.
And then but if a person, I'm reading a book right now called The Inner Game of Tennis. Have you heard of that one? Really good. So the Inner Game of Tennis gets all about how our relationship of our self-talk, he talks it describes it like player one, player two. So player one would be our conscious mind, kind of like telling ourselves what to do. And then player two, this might be a flipped order, and then player two is our physical somatic experience of doing the thing. And so when you get two on your case and you're trying to, do a tennis stroke and you're like telling yourself what to do or telling yourself why you suck, the chatter's too loud, you'll typically mess up. So in the inner game of tennis, it's all about how do you start to be less about telling myself what to do and more about like just being with the process of it happening. So it's not so much I'm doing it, it's more it's happening. And so the way that he suggests with coaching is instead of saying all the bullet points of, okay, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, his suggestion with coaching athletes, that it was like a transition he had, was he would just do, the quote unquote perfect stroke for the person. He would go through it like 10 times and just say, okay, I want you to just watch. I want you to just feel how this feels as I do it. I want you to feel how that feels in your body to do it. And then it's like, okay, now you give it a try. And I'm going to get out of the way and just allow you to more be in like the intelligence of the body, as opposed to being in the place of you kind of tyrannically telling yourself what to do. And things just come more with greater effort. Oftentimes comes greater contraction. And that's like if a person, I got this from Alan Watts, if a person stutters, and you don't stutter less by trying harder. The reason you're stuttering is because you're trying so damn hard. There might be other factors to it too. But if your person's like pay attention, focus in on it, it just makes it worse. So I was like, oh, interesting. Maybe that could relate to other aspects of the way I engage with my daily life as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're explaining flow state, and my best mountain bike rides, I'm not thinking about anything when I'm out. I'm not thinking about mountain biking. I'm not thinking about my pedal stroke. I'm not thinking about steering. I am just letting it happen from all of those sets and reps that I've accumulated over time. And, the same can be said true for Michael Jordan hitting that game-winning shot. He's in flow state. Yeah. He's just letting it happen. He's not thinking about it at all. And that's a powerful state to be in. And I think you can build practices into your life to get into flow state more often. And you mentioned meditation. Making space is so important. And we've had this conversation where I don't meditate in the traditional sense of the word, but I consider a lot of the activities that I do outside to be my moving meditation, where I'm generally listening to one song on repeat and my mind is just in a trance and I am in flow. Like I have no idea of elapsed time. I have no idea of time to go. And many of my best ideas, my most creative ideas, my mental clarity is best when I'm out there in those moving meditations. I'm in nature, my heart rate is elevated, my serotonin levels are boosted, and it's just a magical, magical place to be. And that's why it's part of my daily routine doing that, because I know that's going to put me in that trance. That's going to put me in a flow state, so I can then have a really good conversation with someone. And you can build on these practices throughout the day. So, the exercise yields a really good conversation, which yields happiness afterwards, which, yields great afternoon with your partner. And, it's just habit stacking these flow state activities, or space and presence.
Yeah. Yeah, when you're exercising, like another reframe of exercise, which I find exercise to be kind of like a weird word as well, for all the stuff that we described before, like exercise, like, okay. But exercise also could be, I just watched the Netflix documentary Stutz. Exercise aspect, the way that he perceived exercise growing up was a thing that's like, okay, I'm going to exercise so I don't hate myself, essentially, because I'm fat and I don't fit in culture. This doesn't work. So I'm unacceptable. So I will exercise because I'm unacceptable. And I'm going to exercise so that I'm less unacceptable. And one of the reframes that he had, because in the documentary, the psychologist guy, one of the foundations of how a person can start to develop, a better psyche, or a healthier, more whole psyche, which the term health comes from an old English word, which actually means wholeness. I think it's pronounced like help. It's like HEALP. So it just means whole, health, whole. But a foundation for his psychological work with clients or patients is developing their life force. So a way the person develops their life force is all the stuff that you do, essentially. And so it's like a part of that would be exercise. Do some jumping jacks, do some push-ups, go for a walk outside, get in an ice bath, get in a sauna, eat reasonably good food, just like you got to circulate the body. And then you develop that life force to be able to open up to other stuff, other things that you're interested in, or ideas, or creativity, or relationships, or, just all of the other things and part of the human experience. And the kind of reframe that the actor fella had in that was like, man, if only someone broke that down to me when I was 13 years old. Because I thought exercise was something that you do to be socially acceptable so you don't hate yourself. That was my formula for exercise. So I mindlessly go into a gym, I do skull crushers, and I do bicep curls, and do lateral raises, and okay, what are the other parts that people see? Okay, I got to work on some forward flexion, I got to sort out my abs, okay, I got to get my lower abs, do some leg raises, I want my quads to pop, so I'll just do these mindless leg extensions, now anterior tib raises, chicks dig anterior tibialis, so now I'm going to start working on my anterior tib. And it's like, okay, that's like one approach, and then there's this other approach. It's like, well, your muscles are essentially endocrine organs. They're facilitating the production of hormones, and neurochemicals, and the way that you think and the way that you feel and like who you are comes from the way that you engage with these, these pulley systems. Which is not just a pulley system. It's like a really, unbelievably complex orchestra of pulleys. That's the tensegrity word. And so then it's like, okay, interesting. So I exercise for my mental health. Okay, that's cool. Or I exercise for creativity. I exercise because I'm producing, all sorts of stuff. One of the things considered Miracle-Gro for the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. Producing irisin, which is another myokine that's supported with cognitive function and clarity and memory and word recall and all the things. And so like, wow, okay, so I'm tapping into this pharmacopoeia of endogenous chemicals that make me feel high. Whoa! Because when I was 13, or 14 or 15 or 16 or whatever, I just wanted to get high. I was, let's drink 40s. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so let's roll blunts, let's drink 40s, let's smoke cigarettes, let's alter our minds however we can.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we reframe our story that we have in our physical relationship that it's like, oh no, that feels good, it works. There's ease here. compared to one that has, it's much more frictive, where it's like, okay, I will do this conditionally because I want to love myself. I don't presently love myself. So I'll do that to kind of fill in this space. So I'm socially acceptable. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was a big part of why I worked out growing up. I just felt super insecure. I felt like I didn't, I had like body dysmorphia, but it was for being skinny. So if I was too skinny, which is I think very common with a lot of guys, if I was too skinny, I just didn't love myself. I didn't accept myself. And so my big reason for working out growing up was for that. And so I would just chronically be pounding protein smoothies and, taking all the supplements, and I was like feeding every 2 hours. So I'd go into my high school or middle school bathroom and like pouring protein powders all over the sink, and could always tell if I was in there because there was just like a wreck of different supplements all over the sink. And that was really coming from a place of, I just, at the root, I didn't really know how to love myself. So coming to a place where it's like, okay, how do we start to reorient that lens, our experience with ourselves, because at some point we're going to die. And so why not, while we're alive, infuse as much factors of joy into our life as we can. That includes the way that we engage in relationships, the level of openness, and vulnerability that we have in our relationships. That includes the way that we engage in the transference of energy from food, i.e. eating. So it's like, wow, like I get to eat. Like, damn, that feels good. Compared to like, okay, I have to eat this in order for me to be acceptable to culture. It's like, oh, or like, wow, like we get to move, like, let's go. Compared to, okay, I'm going to go through this grueling set so that at some point I feel like I'm worth it. Nothing wrong with anything. I just think there's an opportunity to infuse more joy, I guess, into our daily lives, and movement and nutrition are like one of the big ones.
Yeah, I wish state changes were taught earlier. Instead of it calling it physical education, which just has this connotation of you're doing it for a physical aesthetic. I wish there were, surveys when I was in elementary school or high school, mindfulness, writing down why I felt so good today. What were the things I did that made me feel really good? What were the social connections I made? What type of movement did I do? What type of team sports? Why are they associated with this state change of me feeling happy? And having that journal as a young child, because I didn't start understanding any of that until my late 20s when I got into Ironman. Up until my late 20s, I was similar to you. I was doing it very much just to boost my ego. So I felt like I would fit in. So I felt like I would attract girls. And it wasn't for a state change. I didn't understand the state change component of it. I didn't understand the serotonin boost that I was getting from it. What was chemically happening in my mind from the exercise, from the sauna sessions. And 28 years of my life that, I was using alcohol instead to fuel vulnerability and instead to fuel what I thought was happiness. So, and I think it has to be kind of survey driven and, in some ways teaching mindfulness because, as a 13-year-old, I don't know that I could formulate a state change from exercise. I'm just like, I feel good. You got some energy. Great. But, if there was a journaling process that you're taught in grade school where you journal every day, I think it teaches you mindfulness and it teaches you how to fill your soul.
Yeah. Getting to know yourself. Like we're waiting for information from some empirically researched study that all of the peers have come together and they're like, okay, like this is it. Meanwhile, science and research is coming off of the back end of the N of one of the human experience. And then science comes back and, 1 year later or 10 years later, X amount of time, year later, like, oh yeah, that breath work thing, that's a thing. Oh, cold exposure. Yep. That's a thing. Oh, exercise, like all of the different things. It all comes from you. Everything that you read about and wait to listen to in a podcast or reading a book or any of that, it all comes from you. It's like, whoa, okay.
You're your own science experiment every day.
So all of this science stuff that I'm waiting for I'm waiting for the green light of like, okay, this is how I can breathe. Okay, this is how I can breathe. Very good. Okay. Okay, this is how I can eat. Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. Science changes. Like that's the whole concept of science. It's perpetually challenging itself. And that's like first principles thinking. It's like we're just continuously like, cool, like yes, but like, are there any holes in this? And so at 1 year, the best diet for every person on the planet might be Atkins. The next year, it might be veganism. The next year, it might be carnivore. The next year, it might be, who knows? Who cares? Like if you right now just said, okay, shut up. How do I feel? I'm going to write down, okay, here's the things I did today that made me feel good. Okay, cool. Here's the things that made me feel like shit. All right, tomorrow, I'm going to stop doing the things that made me feel like shit. And I'm going to try to really fill in a little bit more bandwidth to the stuff that made me feel good. Wow, okay, interesting. Now do that times a week, times a month, times a year. And it's like, damn, I am a scientist, son. I know the science, and I'm continually challenging my own hypotheses of like, what does make me feel good? Is there even maybe like deeper levels to this sensation of feeling good? And it's like, oh, interesting. A lot of the things that made me feel the best that day didn't have anything to do with exercise. Maybe it's the thing that really made me feel really good was I hung out with my kid, or my nephew or whatever. And we just played for 45 minutes. I just got lost in his eyes. He's just, wow, the way he sees the world. It's like, wow, it's like the universe.
Do more of that. Yeah.
And then, wow. And then I was a Power Ranger and he was a dinosaur. And we were being creative, and I was getting out of the idea of who I think I'm supposed to be because this little kid was teaching me who I am. And it's like, oh, interesting. Like, all right, well, at the end, like, what happened? What were the sets? What were the reps? What was your caloric expenditure? Did you have a deload? It was like, I don't care. I feel really good. Like, get off my back.
Yeah, just innate. Yeah, just going back to like the kid. Like I love that you said study what kids do because they're not being sold to. They have no comprehension of all of the marketing messages out there. They're just doing them. They're doing what makes them feel good in the moment, and if it doesn't feel good, they cry. And that's an analogy of what you could do as an adult. Is like if it's making you cry inside, stop doing it. If it's making you smile ear to ear, do more of it.
Yeah, and also within that, something that a stumbling block that I've definitely wandered into, which I think is very common among men in general, would be an inability to cry. Yeah. An inability to feel anything that feels you could conflate with weakness. And it's like the strongest person, bar none, is the person that's vulnerable enough to be able to be like, man, like I feel fill in the blank. I feel sad. I feel happy. I feel, I feel afraid. Like those are the things. It's like, wow. So you're so secure with yourself that you're able, because no matter what, if you're a human, you will be exposed to the cornucopia of emotion. All of them. There's none that are off the table unless you're repressed or afraid of some aspect of yourself. And so, all you need to do is spend a day in a dark room. And you will witness, not that anybody needs to do that, but you will witness all of these different sensations come up. If you spend a couple days in a dark room, you're like, oh man, now I'm starting to feel anger. Oh, I'm starting to feel fear. I'm starting to feel judgment. I'm starting to feel, oh, okay, what do I do with this? I could avoid it. I could, make some more money. I could text somebody and maybe pursue a date, and maybe, oh, now we're having sex. Like, okay, I'm back. I'm good, baby. Or I could just be like, I'm just gonna see where this goes. I'm gonna actually accept this sensation that for the last 20 years I've just sidestepped. Every time it comes up, like, nope, not today, Satan. It's like, okay, like what if this feeling comes up? I don't trust it. I don't accept it. I think it's weak. I think it's, all of these different things. I'm going to welcome it in. I'm going to explore it. I'm going to become super curious about it. Say, oh, what is this? I'm going to explore it through a lens of neutrality of this isn't me. This is just this sensation. It could be coming from culture. It could be coming from ancestry. It could be coming from, food that I ate. It could be coming from all these different things. I'm going to be the sovereign observer of these experiences moving through me. Now suddenly that's like, boof. All right, now you have this anchor. So now you're a person that if sensation, emotion, fear, anger, rage, love, like any of those things come up, you have this, it's almost like you're not just dust in the wind of the judgment of different emotional states. Mm-hmm. You actually have this like overseeing observer of what's happening within that. And if you really, truly are in that observer role, mm-hmm. then you can observe yourself cry. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, I'm feeling emotional. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, okay, cool. I am not the emotion. I'm just in the witnessing of this emotion moving through. Mm-hmm. And now when I'm with somebody else and they're feeling a way, I know that they're not the thing. I know that they're this body experiencing these emotions or these, whatever it may be. And I can see through that part, that anchored observer part within them, and almost start to like invoke that part from them. Because if you're in an emotion that feels scary, it feels like too much. It feels like it's all you ever are, and it's never going to end. Like this is me for the rest of my life. To have someone with you, it's like, whew, like I can see, like you're more than just this storm right now. Like I can be with that deeper you, and whew, I can be with that deeper part of myself. Like that's really powerful. Mm-hmm. But if you're a person that has judgment of these emotions are okay, these are great, these are really bad, we don't do those, it will lead to repression. Mm-hmm. And that felt emotional state will translate to a contraction. Mm-hmm. And that contraction doesn't have anywhere to go, so it just goes. It's now maybe in my, I don't know. Say it's reducing the motility of my liver, which mm-hmm. motility is like this subtle range of motion that all of our organs go through. Mm-hmm. And our the circulation of cerebral spinal fluid and the subtle expansion and contraction of our cranial bones and our sacrum. And if a person, when they're just in a resting state, you'll see a subtle medial rotation in the arms and the legs and a subtle external rotation. Like your whole body breathes. Mm-hmm. And when you impose some type of impression of unacceptance, fear, guilt, shame, something where you go, you hold it in, mm-hmm. it creates a stasis in the body. Mm-hmm. It creates a stopping in the body. Okay, now there's some part of me that I don't accept, I don't love. Mm-hmm. Okay, we stop that. Now stasis, that's going to be the foundation of the buildup of stuff that leads to dis-ease.
Yeah.
So if you have a circulating pond, circulating river, it stays pretty darn clear. It's when you stop some segment of it that suddenly that's when, all the gunk starts to build up, and then eventually it starts to smell funny, and it's like, oh, bro, like I don't want to swim in that. That's the person. And so a person that can come into a place where you're like, oh, like I love it all, like every part, like I love it all. Mm-hmm. This hatred, I hate. I feel hatred. Okay, cool. Like I can love that about you. Whoa, no one's ever loved my hatred. Mm-hmm. What do I do with that? Like, well, I don't know. Let's bring it in. Like, tell me about your hatred. How does it? Where do you feel the hatred? Oh, okay, interesting. It's like in your throat. Does it have a color? Does it have a texture? Does it have a sound? Does it have a noise? Does it have like what? Like, is it? Maybe ask it a question. What are you so mad at? Oh, it has a voice. Wow, and I have this relationship with this thing, whereas before it was just like living in a closet, And so I think that's like this is again one of these like invisible factors that eventually I think if we can start to illuminate some of those aspects of the self, it translates into a person being able to run more freely, having less tension in the body when they're sprinting or cutting or pivoting, or being able to breathe more freely. Suddenly that sensation where for since I was 8 years old and I was maybe abused by someone, or I was afraid of something, or maybe there was abuse in my household, or whatever the thing is, and I didn't feel like it was safe to have a full exhalation. So I'd kind of like my diaphragm wouldn't really completely descend. I would kind of breathe a little bit more in my clavicles and a little bit more like my traps are kind of pulled. I was kind of up in this like panic breath. I learned that was an imprint of like, okay, it's not safe to breathe fully all the way. So I need to keep blood shunting out to the periphery, out to my muscles, out to my legs, out to my forearms, my biceps, my shoulders. And I need to be ready to either run the hell out of this room or be able to fight. So now suddenly I start to build up this bulky, musculoskeletal system. And people start saying like, wow, you're amazing. Bro, you're so jacked. I'm so attracted to you. You're so awesome. Your fear-induced hypertrophy gains are so hot.
So funny.
And then it's like, oh, okay, cool. People like this part. All right, now we've bypassed this part that I was actually really afraid. I felt helpless. And now that part is that impression in Vipassana terms, they call that a samskara, which means impression in Sanskrit. So you have this impression in the body, and now we kind of bypass that because we don't accept that part of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And now we just start building, and we start building, and we make more money, and we hook up with more chicks, and we get more muscles and more gains and gains and gains. And everyone's like, dude, you are so awesome. Mm-hmm. And you're on the cover of the magazines, and you have like everything is freaking perfect, and there's still a root of like I don't actually love myself. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, okay, cool, like, well, let's rewind, and catch up and come back to that part, and just become curious is a big thing. Just keep on being curious, mm-hmm. And like there's no aspect of self that we don't accept. We're like, oh, like bring it in. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Greed. Oh, you're greedy. Okay, bring it in. Mm-hmm. Like any of the things. It's like, oh, like tell me more. Tell me more. I think that will open up to a deeper breath, better HRV, better mobility. Because suddenly your nervous system isn't in a place of subtle threat. It's in a place of like, oh no, I can actually go through full range of motion because I don't need to hunker down into this like combat stance. Mm-hmm. I can start to open up into thoracic extension. I can open up into hip extension. I can kind of allow myself to kind of open out. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of words.
Yeah, I love the curiosity part of it. And I mean, you just did a 4-day darkness retreat. So I'm assuming that your intention going into that darkness retreat was to just be curious about your internal workings and your why various things might trigger you, why you are the way you are. And I told you I would be scared to do a 4-day darkness retreat because I am so obsessed with pushing the ball forward. I love progress. And it would be difficult for me going into that to feel like I was going to be pushing the ball forward, even though that's probably where I could have the biggest gains is by doing something like that I fear, and just listening to what's going on in my mind for 4 days with no external distractions and no to-do list.
Yeah. Most people, I think generally speaking, most people lean into the things that they're already good at and have this way of subtly avoiding the stuff that they're not. Mm-hmm. And then you will wrap on top of that a bow of a concept of progress. Mm-hmm. Like, cool, I'm just going to keep on avoiding these parts that like if there's something that scares, a person about themselves, or there's something that maybe causes them to kind of shrink up a little bit, or maybe they can feel a little contraction and they might start to, oh, my palms are sweating when you talk about that. Like, it's probably a pretty good indication that actually, in fact, like is the work.
Yeah, lean into it. Mm-hmm.
If you want to feel more free in yourself, Because as long as there is some aspect of the self that is afraid of itself, that will be some kind of level of maybe bondage, you could say, or contraction or resistance. But a person that comes into a place like you do really good with is cool. I'm going to lean into this sensation of it's uncomfortable to be in the cold. Great. I'm going to be with that. Okay. It's uncomfortable in the hot. Okay. I'm going to be with that. Okay. I don't want to, this, it hurts to keep on doing these sets of whatever. Cool. Let's just keep on going. And so you actually surprisingly would be very well equipped to do something like that, because that's really the big thing is resilience is a muscle. And so a person that's practiced in that muscle of resilience, it doesn't matter. Like the hardest thing for most people to do is nothing, or the idea of nothing. And if you actually open yourself up to the idea of nothing, or the physical act of doing nothing, suddenly it's this whole other world that's way heavier than what you ever possibly would have anticipated. And that was one of the things that came up that it was pretty interesting was oftentimes people in like the psychedelic realm, they have a tendency of sort of romanticizing that plane of reality. I was hallucinating and saw snakes crawling up my body, and they crawled down my throat, and then they 600 snakes poured out of my heart, and they exploded into the room, and it was like, whoa, like, dude, like, how cool. Like that's a cool story. And we're kind of like, you hear that, you're like, whoa, that person's pretty cool. I think they're a little bit cooler than me in a way. Like their consciousness is, they have cooler consciousness. But I think that another plane of consciousness that's super interesting is this one. Of just being here with the mundaneness, or I don't know, could you say mundanity? Mundity? Is there a word for that? Mundaneness? Just how freaking mundane just sitting with yourself can be. Yeah. Like if you allow yourself to actually venture into that, it's like, whoa, there's a lot there. But the common tendency is, okay, I start to feel that, and then like, okay, I'm going to go for a run. Okay, I'm going to do some kind of business thing. Oh, I'm going to do something productive. Meanwhile, you have this subconscious underpinning that's kind of guiding the show of everything that you're doing, that for the most part, we have all of these different distractions that we can just kind of sidestep around. If a person allows the space to just be with those parts, and when it starts to feel uncomfortable, you say, tell me more. Oh boy, I don't like that. Oh, okay. Tell me more. Oh boy, this is really uncomfortable. Oh, okay, tell me more. And there's so much in that, and it just keeps on unraveling and unraveling and unraveling. And the idea of boredom typically is just another parachute cord in a way. Sure. And so the mind, I think it feels like it's kind of getting into something, and then be like, oh, I'm bored. I judge boredom as being unproductive, waste of time, bad. Okay, cool. So now I have a reason to get out of this thing, when in fact the deeper quote unquote work was actually just about to start.
Yeah, leaning into the boredom, leaning into just listening. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you're willing to do that, it's like, bro, this plane of reality is like absurdly interesting and absurdly challenging. Way more challenging than going for a 10-mile run. Like way more. I mean, I guess it depends on the person, but way more challenging for you probably than going a 10-mile run, because your body's like, no big deal. I'll do that, for breakfast. Like, it's not a problem. But to be able to sit with that and say like, you start to squirm a little bit. Okay, now you're in the cold plunge. You're in the cold plunge of your consciousness. And then if you allow yourself to keep on going into those layers, it's just an endless maze of unpacking yourself. And for the most part, people, myself and, I think most folks in at least Western culture, we have a tendency of having, in this Stutz documentary, he calls it your X factor or something, or your X part. And that's like that part of non-acceptance or pain or something that happened. And then you kind of orient your life around that X factor within yourself. If we allow ourselves to actually start to investigate that, it just is this like ongoing unfurling of these deeper aspects of ourselves. And if we allow that to happen and unwind ourselves, it starts to open up to greater potential of relationship with ourselves, with each other, with your dog, with God, if you have some perception of that. But for the most part, throughout my life, and I'm still doing it. Like I'm still doing it. But at least I can be in the witness of it. Like, oh, look what I'm doing again. I'll feel myself starting to venture into terrain that could kind of translate to like deeper understanding or like healing or whatever. And I am afraid of that because I still maybe don't trust that. And so then I say, okay, I'm bored. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do that. I'm going to do that. And we can just do that our whole life. And meanwhile, you have almost like this, it can be almost like parasite might be too heavy of a word, but it could be a parasite that's pulling the levers in the background, and you just kind of keep on doing the things.
Going through the motions.
Just keep on going through the motions, baby. And then you get to be even near death experience or something, or maybe you get to be like when you're your deathbed or something, and suddenly everything becomes clear.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, I have been a puppet for 50 years.
Yeah.
And now in this instant, I'm finally seeing clearly. So to be able to like fast forward that as soon as possible, it would make sense for it to be pretty high on most people's list.
Fascinating.
Definitely.
That's powerful. That's super powerful.
Yeah.
Well, just going back to where we started, brother, I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for your friendship. I'm grateful that you're such a self-experimenter. You are the type of people I like to surround myself with, because I feel like I learn my most from self-experimenters. So, thank you for your friendship, and thank you for conveying your learnings to the world. You definitely impact a lot of people out there to live a better life. Where can people find you? Where can people find your book, Align Method?
Yeah. Well, thanks. Thank you. I really, so the things that I really value about you is you have a very authentic, like compassionate way about you. And it's like very clear that you really genuinely care about people, which is so beautiful. Which would probably translate to, I'd imagine you have like I don't know. Do you feel like you really care about do you feel like you're like gentle with yourself? Like if you were your own child, how's your relationship with yourself?
Yeah, I've learned to be, definitely. In my 20s, I definitely was not. In my late 20s, having gone through those Ironman years, I feel like I, kind of like you going through this darkness retreat, I just unlocked a lot of mental clarity. It was just a lot of time by myself, biking for 5 hours, running for 2+ hours, where I could swimming in a pool for an hour and a half, where I just got to think and listen. And your points are all of what you've said is so on point with that, of you need to make space and you need to listen. So I started becoming kind to myself and really loving myself and separating myself from egotistical things in my late 20s and early 30s. And, for me, a lot of it was movement. And that's why I say movement is medicine. It was a medicine for me to just thrive and feel like I was the best version of myself and I was putting out the best energy possible and then attracting that into my life.
Yeah, that's really cool. I appreciate it. So I host a podcast called Align. I've been doing that for the last 7.5 years or something. And the original name for the podcast actually was, I think it was Movement Medicine, which I don't think sounds like a good name for a podcast, but that was what it was called for like 6 months. And then I changed it to Align.
No shit.
Align podcast. Yeah, so Movement Medicine was that was the OG Align podcast, was Movement Medicine.
Amazing.
So if people are interested in that, that's like something that I'm really I've had a great time getting to connect with people that I have over the years.
I love your podcast. You have great guests, great conversations on there. I've learned a lot from it.
Wow, that's cool. Oh, so you listen to the podcast?
I sure do.
Oh, that's cool. That's always surprising to me. It makes my sphincters clench up a little bit when like people that I actually like know and respect, they listen. I'm like, oh shit, I literally only have a rotation. I need to do a better job.
I have a rotation of about 5 people, and you're one. You're on there.
Wow, well, that's cool. Thank you. So then I wrote a book called The Align Method, which incorporates concepts from, like Andrew Huberman. He was supportive enough to have revised the vision chapter. I had Wim Hof and various different people, like from Oxygen Advantage. Mm-hmm. They helped with the respiratory chapter. It was like a mishmash of the world's, from my perception, the world's greatest thinkers on how to be more effective in your day-to-day movement experience. Contribute to that, which was so cool. So that's called The Align Method.
Amazing. Appreciate you. Come back out to Denver soon.
Yeah, for sure. I would love that, man. And vice versa with Austin.
9 Elements listeners can receive 20% off your first Restore service using the code ELEMENTS20 when making your first appointment. That code again is ELEMENTS20 to save 20% when booking your first service at Restore.